In this video, we're going to go over the scripts feature of PowerShell Universal. Scripts can be found under the automation section inside the PowerShell Universal admin console. When you click scripts, you can view it in a list view or also in a folder view. So what I am going to do is create some basic scripts to show off all the features of the integrated PowerShell host that we have for PowerShell Universal in scripts. So to create a new script, we can click Create New Script, and I'm going to call this one Parameters. I'm going to leave all the settings as default and click OK. So now you can see I have this Parameters view that has a script on the left-hand side and settings, jobs, and schedules on the right-hand side. Later in this lesson, we're going to go through what all these settings are for, but in the meantime, we're actually going to build out some scripts and see how we integrate with PowerShell. So to run a script, you can just click the Run button up here, and I will click OK. And this is kind of what a default output looks like for a script. At the top is the job ID, whether or not it was successful, the name of the script, who or how it was run, and then where it was run. So you can see it was run in the integrated environment, when it was run, and how long it took to execute. Any output will be shown in this left-hand view. Pipeline output, errors, and parameters are shown in the right-hand panel. So let's make this script a little more interesting. So I am going to add a param block to the top. And the first parameter I will add is just an untyped parameter. So this parameter doesn't specify what type it is. It's just kind of a default parameter. And we'll save that script. Now if we actually go to invoke this script, you'll see that we automatically looked at that param block and created this text box based on that untyped parameter. So if I were to actually type something in there, what you'll see is the output from this script, and it says that it says test because that's what I put into that untyped parameter, and I just kind of wrote it out to the pipeline. So now let's take a look at adding another parameter. In this one, I'm just going to do system.day of week, and we'll call that day of week, and I will add that to my script output. So now when I save that and I go and run it, you'll see that we have a day of week parameter now. So we have untyped and day of week. If I hit that drop down, we're actually going out and looking up that enum and finding all the values of that enum and putting them into the drop down. So we'll save that. And now you can see that Monday was output because that's what I selected in the drop down. All right, so now let's add another parameter. So the other one we support are switches. So I'll add that. Actually, I'm just going to copy a bunch of other values in here just so we don't have to type them all. So I've added a switch, I've added a string with a validate set attribute at the top, I've added a date time, and I've added a PS credential. So now if we save that and go to our script, you'll see we have a bunch more parameters. So these kind of are some of the supported types that we support. So we have day of week, we have a true false, we have our validate set, we have our date time selector, so you can select your date and your time, and then we have a credential drop down. So let's actually go and add a credential. I'm going to import a credential from my local vault. So I have this IIS user, and it's just a PS credential. So now I have that variable available to me, and if I go to my script, you can see in my credential drop down, I now have that IIS credential. And we could go through and select things like date and time, our validate set, true or false, and click OK. And, oh, whoops. Oh, I know what I did. We can't name this credential. We're going to call that credential 2. And actually, we want to output all these. So I'm going to do true and false, validate set, date time, and we will do the credential 2. Save that, and now when we go and run it, let's see what the output looks like for that. Set the date and time, and we will set the credential. And now you can see that we got some more information inside our script, and on the right hand side we actually have some pipeline output. here's my IIS user, and that's like the hash of the secure string. All right, so there's a couple other parameter things that we can also accomplish. I am going to just get rid of these to make it a little bit easier to see what we're working with. And I am going to add a mandatory parameter, so we also support that. So if you have the parameter attribute with mandatory in there, it's going to make a required parameter. You can also add help. So if you have a parameter with the help message on there, I'll show you what that looks like. And finally, you can actually set display names for parameters. So here we have the component display name attribute added to the top of this display name parameter, and that display name now has a space in it, as you can see. So let's save that, and when we go to execute our script, you'll see that the required is now required. It's got the little asterisk there. The help message shows up here as a tooltip, so you can actually hover over that, and you can see the help message that was included in our parameter attribute. And then finally, you can see the display name is set here, so we have a little more information about that. And finally, we do support parameter sets now, so let's actually add a parameter set in here. So you can see we have set 1 and set 2. And then I'm just going to put in an all sets parameter. So this one will end up in set 1, this one will end up in set 2, and then the all sets parameter it will be available in both parameter sets. So then we can put a default parameter set inside our commandlet binding attribute on top of the param block. So what this is effectively going to do is say that the parameter set 2 is our default one, and then we have 2 parameter sets, and then all sets will appear in both of those parameter sets. All right, so now when we run it, this is kind of how it looks. You can see it defaulted to our default parameter set 2, and set 2 is displayed, and all sets is also displayed. So if I were to select this, you can see it switches to set 1, all sets is still there. So it kind of makes it so that you can have a script with a bunch of different parameter sets and this little drop down to select which one you want to run. All right, so now let's create another script to show what happens when we have warnings and errors. So I'll just call this errors, and you can see the error action is silently continue right now. If I were to actually do write error in here and say, oh no, and save that, and when I run that, you'll see that we do get an error inside the script. It pops up, oh no, it's red, and you'll see that the error is logged there. And but the script itself is success, and we do that because this is a non-terminating error by default, and silently continue is what is set in the error action. But if we change that to stop and now run this script, what you'll see is that error now has failed. And if you actually hover over the error, you can see that the output of that error is actually why it has failed. So that's a little bit easier to see inside a view like this, where you're not looking at the output. All right, so what happens if we have a warning? So warnings are a little bit different. They won't actually fail the job, but they will put it in a warning state. So you can see, oh no, pops up. So it's just kind of another state that you could put in your scripts to write a warning, like it didn't fail, but something went wrong. All right, let's talk a little bit about pipeline output. So PowerShell Universal stores all the pipeline output from your scripts. So by default, we just capture all of that, and we store it as CLI XML serialized objects. And those objects then can be viewed in the admin console or consumed by other PowerShell scripts, either within PowerShell Universal or outside PowerShell Universal. You can actually use our commandlets to retrieve that pipeline output. So let's do get service just to show you what a pipeline output looks like, a little more interesting pipeline output. We're just going to run this. You can see kind of like the standard output that you would see in PowerShell here. But on the right-hand side, you can see that we have this pipeline output tree view. And that actually contains the actual pipeline objects. So these are somewhat rich objects. They're not live objects anymore, obviously, because they've been serialized. But you could consume these as PowerShell serialized objects in your PowerShell scripts. All right. Another integration that we have is with some of the host features. So I'll show a couple of those. We will do progress first. So if you have any scripts that have write progress, or you use any commandlets that have write progress, like for example web commandlets, we actually integrate with the progress system, and that allows you to show progress in your script. So what I'm doing here is I'm just counting from 1 to 100 through a for each object, and then I am calling write progress. I'm passing in the current value as the % complete. I'm just saying progressing, and I have a start sleep of 100 milliseconds. So if we save that and run it, what you'll notice up here, it's saying progressing, and that's actually from write progress. And this value is what we actually are passing in via for each object and write progress. So, you can make it a little more interesting or useful than that, but it automatically integrates with that. All right, another thing that we integrate with in terms of PowerShell scripts are things like read host or anything that requires input. So what we can do with read host is put read host in just as you would with any PowerShell script, and we actually integrate directly with that. So what's going to happen is the job's going to transition into a waiting for feedback state. So in the top right here, you can see that we have a respond to feedback button. And if you click that, it's going to prompt you with whatever you put in the read host prompt. And I can say something in the feedback dialog here, and you'll see that the script then outputs that because read host returned that to the pipeline. You can also store that in a variable or that kind of thing. So it's kind of one way to prompt your users as the script runs without having to do anything too crazy. It's just like automatically built in. All right, let's talk a little bit about environments. So we actually have another lesson about what environments are and how to use them and configure them and everything. But I'm actually going to set up a script to use an environment. So we have an environment. You can see here by default it's just set to nothing. Effectively it's set to default. So whatever your default environment is, in this case it's the integrated environment, is what this script will run as. So if I just run this script, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do PS version table, and I will do get process ID PID. So we're going to output the PS version table, and we're also going to output the current process. So if we save this and run it, you can see that we're running PowerShell version 7.1.5. And the process is Universal Server. So that's actually running inside the Universal Server itself. And if we wanted to run it as like a different version of PowerShell, we could actually change the drop-down for this Run Script button by selecting a different version. So this is my PowerShell 7.2.3 version. If I click OK there, you're going to see that it actually ran in PowerShell 7.2.3 and inside the actual PowerShell process. So we went ahead and started a PowerShell process in the background, started up this job, and executed the script in it. And you get a little more information when you run it this way. You can actually see the process ID here, which is helpful for debugging issues that you may have with jobs. So the other thing that you can do with scripts is you can actually assign the environment directly on the script. So if I were to do that, like we'll set it to Windows PowerShell, save that, and if I go and execute my environment script, you can see it's now set to Windows PowerShell rather than the default environment. And when I invoke it, you'll see that there's no environment dropdown. That's because we've assigned the environment to Windows PowerShell for this script, and you can't change it, at least not in the run dialog. So we run there, and you can see the output for this was PowerShell 5.1, and the process name was PowerShell. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about credentials. So I'm going to create a new script called cred, and I am just going to put who am I in there. So currently I'm running this as my user, and I will just run this, and you can see that it's Adam Desk Adam R. So I'm running as myself. But if I were to come back here and say run as, and change that to a different user, this was that IIS user I brought into my variables, and I click OK there, it won't work on the integrated environment. You can't like change credentials in the integrated environment. But what we can do is change this to 7.2 and IIS. And now you can see this PowerShell process started up. We did get like some error in here, but AtomDesk/IIS is the user that I'm running as. So, we have a different lesson on how to configure run as credentials for services in IIS. In a very basic environment like this, it's pretty easy to just elevate and run as a different user. So that's how you run as different users. And similar to the way that you can set environments per script, not during the run dialog, you can also do that with credentials. So I could set this to IIS, and then it will use that run as, and you can see the run as value is not available to me inside the run dialog anymore, but it's going to automatically run as IIS if I run that. Okay, so now I'm going to go through some of the configuration options that you're going to find inside your scripts. So if we go back to one of these scripts, you're going to see all these settings on the right-hand side, and just kind of quickly go through what some of these are. So name and description are pretty self-explanatory. Timeout, number of minutes. So if you have a script that's long running that should time out in 30 minutes, you can put that there and we'll automatically stop it. The retry limit will retry a script if it fails. So you may have a flaky script or something that requires some other resource, and we'll retry up to this retry limit. So you might want to retry 3 times or 10 times, something like that. By default, we keep max history of jobs per script at 100, so you can definitely increase that. Obviously, increasing that will reduce performance and increase database size. So in V3, it won't be such a big deal with the performance since they'll be storing in SQL, but with our LightDB database, we try to keep it pretty lean. The anonymous setting will actually allow you to execute a script without being authenticated. So the idea being there, you may use this script in a page, and the user might not actually be authenticated. So if you have scripts that you don't want users to actually have to log in to use, you could do that. The discard pipeline setting actually gets rid of the pipeline's output, and that can be a performance increase and storage savings. So if you're not using pipeline output, it might be useful to just disable or discard the pipeline output. So yeah, your scripts will run faster and they'll use less, the jobs will use less storage space. We talked about error action environments and credentials. We also have tags. So I don't have any tags defined here. We actually have an entire lesson dedicated to tags. They're kind of twofold. One, they're good for grouping and grouping scripts based on like functionality. People also use them for like scripts in development versus production scripts, that kind of thing. But you can also use them for access controls. So you can assign access controls to tags and then tag things throughout PowerShell Universal. And finally, we have a disable manual invocation setting, and what that does is it actually prevents users from running scripts manually. They only can be run via triggers or schedules. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit about layout of your scripts. So in my example here, I actually have my repository set up to just kind of be a basic flat repository. So I'm going to pull that up in Windows Explorer so you can kind of see how my scripts look in here. So here you can see I have several scripts and I have one test folder that I'll actually delete. And inside here we have a scripts.ps1 that kind of provides all that metadata about the scripts. One setting that you can do, is you can go into settings, general, data, and some users may they wouldn't want all their scripts at the base of the repository, so you could have like a scripts folder. And if we save that, what you're going to see what happens is all the scripts have moved into this scripts folder now. So rather than being at the root of the repository, now they're moved in there. So that's what the script base folder does. And what's cool about that is nothing changes inside the UI here. So you don't really realize it from an admin console UI perspective that the scripts are now in that folder. So now let's jump into the folder view. So you can hit this drop down on the right side here to either be in folder or list view. Folder view has this folders section on the left hand side, and clicking on that allows you to create a folder. So I'll just do a nested folder here, And now you can see I have a nested folder, and it will only display the scripts for the folder that you have selected. So if I actually go to my scripts directory, you can actually see that it created that nested folder. All right, and then obviously we can go in and create scripts inside our nested folder. So you just need to make sure that's selected over there. And if you are in list view, you will have some indication that something is in a nested folder. You can't create scripts inside folders in the list view. You'll have to go into the folder view and then select the folder that you want to create those scripts within. All right, the last thing I want to show off is just the configuration for scripts. So if we come in here, you can see that we have new PSU script for each one of our scripts that we have defined in today's lesson. And we have the parameters, errors, pipeline. The real big thing here is the path needs to point to the actual script, and that's relative to your repository directory or your script base path folder. As you can see, there's no indication that we're in the scripts folder. We kind of put that path together based on this setting and what is in your scripts.ps1. Additionally, you can see we have things like credentials, information actions, error actions. All that is configured within our new PSU script call here. The only thing that isn't configured is the actual contents of the script, and we read that based on this path. So your scripts kind of stay as PowerShell scripts that aren't necessarily integrated directly into PowerShell Universal. You could move them somewhere else without having to put a bunch of crap in there that is based for PowerShell Universal. All right, so in this video, we went over the automation feature, the scripts automation feature for PowerShell Universal. There are some additional lessons you're going to want to look at around this, including environments, secrets and variables, and tags. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and definitely provide feedback in the comment section below.